Welcome to the D&D Fitness Radio Podcast, brought to you by your hosts, Don Saladino from New York City and Derek Hansen from Vancouver, Canada.
So let's do a quick little intro. So I want to introduce Anya. She's the co-founder and CEO of Belcampo. All right. She's an entrepreneur, chef, and agriculture expert. She has appeared as a judge on the Food Network's Iron Chef America. And she comes highly spoken for by my good friend, Ben Pekulski, who we've had on the, Derek, I think we have had him on the show. Haven't we had him on the show?
Yep, we have.
We've had Derek, Ben on the show, and the reason why I got confused was because Ben and I have done a couple things together, so I kind of lose track of that. But it's been interesting to see Ben's 180 in life in general, from bodybuilding to now more kind of, I don't even know how I would explain Ben. He's definitely gone more of a holistic route, which I obviously love, but I still love the grinding the iron route that Ben does. So Anya, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Can you talk about Belcampo a little bit? Can you give us a little bit background and fill our viewers in on it?
Yeah, Belcampo is a ranching company. We farm regeneratively. So our style of raising animals is all oriented around making them a positive influence in the environment. We want to leave the environment better than we found it. So we aim to actually sequester carbon in the environment as opposed to taking it out. And the neat thing about Belcampo is that we own the whole supply chain. We have our own processing, our USDA slaughterhouse. We have a complete full traceability on our supply chain. And we sell our products through our own restaurants and increasingly through e-commerce and a bit in grocery stores as well.
Now, I've seen a Belcampo spot over on the west side in New York City. I want to say, is that correct? Did I see one over there?
Hudson Yards, sadly closed in COVID. That was one of the locations that I just, with COVID, did not feel confident about the future of that development post-pandemic. Don, it was just a question of like, do people want to go inside a big enclosed mall with ventilation systems, you know? So I pulled the trigger on that decision basically as soon as the pandemic hit, and we just exited the lease.
Yeah, no, it's been difficult. I've owned a gym in New York City for 15 years already. And ironically, I was telling Derek recently that my 15-year lease happened to have expired on May 31st, which you couldn't have had any better timing. So I paid my last 2 months and my equipment's sitting there right now. And what are we going to do with it? I don't know. There's just so many, I mean, you obviously made the right decision because we just don't know. We don't know if, you know, are gyms allowed to reopen? Are we going to reopen restaurants? Are they going to close restaurants again? You just don't know. It's just the volatility of all that is just so unpredictable.
Yeah, I mean, from a business perspective, I think of COVID as like every month in COVID feels like about 3 years of business evolution if you're riding the wave. And I've been trying to ride the wave. Sometimes I fall off. But broadly, if you're riding the wave, it's like 3 years. So if I look at it, in the first 2 months of COVID, I gained 18,000 followers or downloads of my app. Mm-hmm. Bananas. It would have taken me years to get 18,000 people on my app. Mm-hmm. But it's like, and then I also went from 14% of my transactions digitally facilitated to over 80%. So it's like, you just get this fast forward on all of your kind of business actions, like all these big consumer shifts that were happening just sped up. And I think the same thing in fitness. You've been seeing for a while, like the transition to products like Peloton and the Mirror, right? So digitally facilitated things that allow people to commute less and park less and drive less. And I think that it's going to just hasten. It's not like it's bringing in innovation necessarily. It's just speeding up things that were already happening, you know? And in restaurants, people are already gravitating towards more grab and go. There was a decline in fine dining, a slow bleed over the past couple of years. My company's restaurants had to become increasingly facilitated by tech. That was just sort of part of our pattern. And we were going from like 4% 3 years ago to 14% this year, and then going from 14 to 80% of your orders facilitated by tech, which means that somebody's buying it on the platform. That's just bananas, you know? So it's been amazing because it's like, I don't feel like it introduced many new things to my world, but it certainly sped up a lot of things that I was aware of. Right.
Yeah, and it's better in the long run for you also. I mean, that's going to cut down on your overhead, and it's going to cut down on probably human error and specific things. You know, I mean, you know how that all works. So, it's always interesting to hear, and a lot of people are having a difficult time admitting this because so many people out there are having a difficult time with COVID. But you really see who the true entrepreneurs are from the ones that were able to pivot through all this and make the best out of it and actually end up better off than they were before they started.
Yeah, I've been able to pivot into a much higher margin business. And some of the stuff that was harder for me initially was just, I laid off close to 300 people. But those jobs were not salary jobs on any promotion path. I kept all my salary jobs and I'm increasing my salary jobs. So now, that pain of March when I'm like, these people I care about and train them. And I'm talking about the front of house and some back of house in all the restaurants and then a few other positions in the company. But, now a couple months in, it's like, none of those jobs were jobs that were career path oriented. And now with e-commerce build and the way that we're restructuring the restaurants, I'm building more careers. And that's actually even a positive right there. It's like, you can say, yeah, there's sort of the sticker shock of these people and the amount of jobs that we had to eliminate because we didn't have restaurants anymore. But then if I actually look at the potential to create meaningful change in somebody's life, those jobs were a paycheck for a couple months, typically, right? They weren't meaningful pathways to growth and personal development. So I actually even kind of have come to peace with that, like as a positive broadly, because now the company is restructured about a third of our prior workforce, but those third of the jobs are actually all jobs that are really, I think, ones that have real growth potential.
I had a question too, now that we're on this COVID topic, about just even food production and the concepts and perceptions around, we had these meat packing plants that had all these outbreaks, and how is that going to change? Is that going to change at all?
You mean the system?
Yeah, just the way, are people's, even consumers, perception of like, where am I going to get my food and is it going to be safe or is it going to be, those types of things?
That's a great question. I think that the meat supply crisis, it kind of lifted up the lid of a pretty dirty corner of the American food system. And I think folks who cared to peek in there were like, this is disgusting. Now, how many folks cared to peek in there, right? Like how many folks are really actually like that, paying attention to that? Because at the same time that information was going out there and people were like, wow, maybe I should spend up and get a cleaner source verified product like what I offer and many other small farms do. It's combined with a moment of a lot of economic insecurity. So you're asking people to spend more, right? So that's a challenge. But I think broadly the issues, so there's kind of two forces that really support the value proposition of Belcampo, of my company, in this time. One is that people have learned about how bad the meat supply system is. Mm-hmm. And then two is that people are concerned about their health, right? And that broader kind of awareness of like, okay, I got to double down on health. That, I think when you're looking at how do you source food for health, I think you want to start with protein. You're talking about animals that share most of their DNA with you, unlike vegetables, right? So you actually have a real kind of causality to, eating animals that are raised in an environment that makes them obese. You probably don't want to dip into that supply, right? So there's a really nice kind of like awakening for people around the sourcing. So I feel like COVID is causing a broader awakening for a lot of people. I think even the active just need to be at home and cooking more and facing relationships that weren't working and facing aspects of your life that weren't working. I feel like there's this broader awakening happening that's very positive. In my corner of the pool with the meat supply evidence that happened, I'm sort of frustrated that it didn't really, it was talked about a lot as an issue. And then with Trump's mandate to reopen, basically these plants just powered through. So the crisis was not as massive as it could have been had the executive order not happened. But that said, I think that really surfaced some issues, which is that, hey, these meat supply companies that make up the vast majority of our processing capacity in the United States treat their workers terribly. Mm-hmm. And the question you might ask yourself is, if they treat the people like that, how the hell do they treat the animals?
You know what? It's interesting because, listen, I've been in the fitness space professionally for over 21 years now. I've been a nutrition fanatic for probably 25 years. I mean, I just love it. It's a passion of mine. And I've always, for the last 20 years, I've been getting asked the question. And I feel like I was almost before my time a bit, how do you eat? What type of diet do you eat? I'm like, I'm a food quality guy. because I'm not on gimmicky diets. I believe in slow burning carbohydrates. I believe in vegetables, and I believe in high quality proteins. And over the last 5 years, I feel like there's been so much bullshit on the market with bad mouthing, red meat and bad mouthing animal protein. But people aren't talking, they're talking about it being a bad source, which I completely disagree with, obviously. But what they're not actually talking about is, what is your excuse not to buy a high quality protein? When I say high quality protein, I mean your food, for instance, where you're actually sourcing your meats from. So what is the cost difference? Because everyone's like, oh, well, buying organic or buying a high quality source food is a lot pricier. Is it really that much pricier? Because when I go into, I had to do something for Muscle and Fitness the other day where they wanted me to go through a grocery store and they wanted me to look at, like, can you shop for under $50 for a week? And I'm like, oh my God, not me. But it was one of those, under $50 stories that they wanted to do. And going through and actually looking at the cost for, like, say, what they were calling, organic or grass-fed beef, to going into like a Wild by Nature or maybe a butcher that carries a high quality meat, and seeing what the cost was there. I don't, it didn't really, it doesn't affect me, obviously. And I know someone else who's not, maybe in my situation, it might affect a little bit differently, but what is the cost difference? Or is that just something, is that an excuse that people are blowing out of proportion? There goes my dog, sorry.
I think it is a meaningful difference.
Okay.
But because it depends by protein.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the greater the premium associated with the natural product, the more suspicious you should be about the conventional product. So in the case of chicken, my chicken runs as high as like $10 a pound. In conventional, you can get chicken for under $1 a pound. So we're 10x. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But my chickens take 5 times as long to grow to the same weight. Okay,
can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think people don't really understand the process.
Yeah.
And I think a big problem out there is they don't really understand what they're getting. That's probably why they're not valuing it the way that I do. I don't see $9 extra as being a big deal for me because I understand the value of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, Don, you're speaking to how does food fit into your value matrix. And one thing that I call out is that, in the 1950s, we spent close to 30% of our paycheck on food. Now it's under 10%. And, there's just a different prioritization. We'll happily drop hundreds of dollars a month on gaming tweaks and add-ons to our apps and many, many things that I would consider like pretty low priority in terms of the broader content and quality of your life. But we bulk at an incremental cost associated with quality food that makes a really meaningful difference to your life and your children's life and the planet, right? So there's a question about cultural priorities, in the time that we've cut our proportional paycheck going to food by 70%. Think of the number of monthly subscriptions you have for the Netflix, the Spotify, or all those different things, right? So it's like, what are your priorities? How are you spending your time and how are you spending your dollars? This is also analogous. Like in America, we watch on average 5 hours of TV a week. And I think we cook like 90 minutes a week or something.
Yeah, no.
5 hours of TV a day. And I don't know what it is for cooking, but it's like less than an hour a week on average. So it's money and it's time. And we choose to spend. I don't think there's a question of like absolute dollars are different in any way. But food has gotten extremely inexpensive in the past 5 decades. And it's gotten inexpensive at the cost of quality. And we have gotten accustomed to cheap food. So if you look at going back to more traditional values in food production, you have a much higher quality product, but it costs a lot more to produce. So my beef costs on average like 3 to 5 times what a conventional beef costs. And I think our chicken is something that costs like 20 times the cost to produce compared to conventional. And that also to do, the rough math of it, guys, is just lifespan and then quality of food. So all of our animals take a lot longer to get fat because they go through puberty later, because they're highly active and they eat a natural diet. So just like all of us, if you're highly active and eat a natural diet, you do not gain weight as quickly. right? Or you don't put on fat as quickly. You put on lean muscle, which is, not necessarily what you're going for in a finished animal. So we put our animals into a natural environment where they move a lot. They have to forage for their own food, depending on the species, and they're getting a very, very natural diet. So they take a lot longer to grow. But really, the cost of raising an animal is a function of how many days it's alive, right? Each day costs. So in the case of my beef, it's somewhere, depending on the conventional comparison, it's about 40 to 60% longer lifespan, okay, than a conventional animal. So, and you pair that with natural food. In the case of chickens, it takes us 5 times the amount of time.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so you go from 2 weeks to 10 weeks for finishing. Now, why is that happening? Because really, in the case of beef, it's kind of shocking that the food is totally different. They're on grass compared to corn. They're moving around compared to confinement, but it's still only 40 to 60% more time to get them to get to the same weight. Mm-hmm. So that seems more kind of analogous to what you'd imagine. In chickens, it's so radically different. They're being fed grain, just like conventional chickens are. Our chickens are fed grain. Grain is a natural diet for an omnivore, for the chicken, with its monogastric. So it's got one digestive tract, unlike the cow that's got multiple stomachs. But the crazy thing to me is that chickens are fed the same thing, and they're the same breed. I mean, we actually use Cornish cross, which is the same as the majority of chicken producers in the US. What's different is that they're raised in confinement with heavy antibiotic usage and a huge amount of cortisol, right? So it's effectively you're like coaching like a really strong inflammatory and stress response that causes them to gain weight really quickly. So it's really similar. I mean, you talk about this in human health all the time, Ron. It's like you're creating a context. I mean, weight loss, weight maintenance, musculature, it has as much to do with all the societal and environmental impacts in your life as specifically what you put in your mouth, right? And the same thing holds true for animal agriculture.
Can you explain to our viewers a little bit the difference between grass-fed and grain-fed? Because you're saying right now that feeding chickens grains are natural, yet with cattle you want to feed them grass. Or maybe I'm incorrect. Maybe I've been steered wrong on that. Can you give us a little clarity?
Absolutely. So there's 2 major categories of livestock: ruminants and monogastrics. Ruminants, the word ruminate, to like reflect, right, chew on things. That's because ruminants chew a lot because they eat very, very low calorie, low nutrient dense food naturally, very high fiber. They eat grass, right? They eat they're the guys that lost, right, in the battle for nutrients. So they got the bottom of the equivalent of like the whales, right, that get to eat the plankton. They evolved to eat very abundant, very low quality food, which is forage. Monogastrics are different. The humans are monogastrics. Omnivores and carnivores are all monogastrics. They have one stomach, okay? So they can eat a wide range of foods. Ruminants, on the other hand, have 5 stomachs that are designed to really slowly digest this very low quality nutrition, turn it into very high quality meat and connective tissue, right? So it's a pretty miraculous thing that the cow can take this sort of garbage food of just pasture and convert it into very high quality protein. And that's the role it played in traditional agriculture systems. With conventional agriculture, what we've discovered is that if you put cows onto corn or any seed, you're going to get a much higher response and of fat gain and weight gain. The reason why is that it's a mix. It's a high calorie density, and it's also somewhat inflammatory. So naturally, in nature, of course, I mean, grass has seeds. So it happens that cows would have gone out, or bison or whatever, or oxen on the field and occasionally eaten seed. The seed typically matures and it's ripe when the grass is not green, and that's actually less appealing typically to cows. But hypothetically, they can get a small amount of seed in their diet and be fine. When you put them on poor diet for them nutritionally, like corn, which is inflammatory and just too nutrient dense for them, they typically gain weight very quickly, but they also become quite sick. And if you look inside the rumen, the stomach of a grass-fed cow, I've seen them plenty of times on the floor of our slaughterhouse. It kind of smells like a compost bin. It's like kind of this earthy, humusy smell of grass decomposing, and the color of the stomach lining is pink, and it's basically looks like the inside of a stomach, right, with this grass, and it's partially digested. I've only seen pictures of the rumens from the corn finished cows, but they're typically black and slick on the inside. The color of the inside of the stomach is not pink; it's grayish, and apparently they stink. It really smells bad, and that's just a sign of like you're feeding an animal a food that effectively makes it sick.
Yeah, but it's going rancid in a way, right? I mean, isn't that cattle just becoming sick?
Also, I mean, E. coli, right? E. coli, you hear about E. coli a lot in beef, right? In relation to beef contamination. And E. coli is a sickness in cows. It's not something that exists in cows that they're okay with. It's something that they get sick with when their immune system is very compromised, right? So the fact that E. coli is so rampant in the American beef herd is just existing additional evidence about how sick these animals are in the corn-fed system. So think about it for you guys. Like imagine one day it's like you're like, listen, you're going to stay in your bedroom. You got to go to the bathroom on the floor in here, but we'll hose it down once a week, and you're only going to eat Fritos.
Yeah,
you're going to say, "Can I have some amoxicillin, please?" And thank you, right? Like, of course. And so that's where the antibiotics come in. And you know, a lot of these producers will claim like no hormones and no antibiotics. Okay, on the hormones, that's if you make that claim, that's regulated in a way that can be mandated. When they say no antibiotics, they mean none that are used for prophylactic purposes. Prophylactic means just like the reason you'd take it if you were locked in that bedroom. It's like, I'm going to get pretty sick in here, right? And what happens though is that all of these companies have veterinarians on payroll who will happily say, these animals were on the risk of getting sick. And they're right, because if you have animals in confinement ag eating bad food, they're going to get sick, right? So it's a pretty corrupt system as well. And this is well documented. This isn't just my POV. Like there's a number of books. A great one is called The Meat Racket about this, where there's a whole industry of veterinarians on payroll in the Tysons and Purdue's of the world. And those guys are tasked with effectively prescribing prophylactic antibiotics that, however, do not need to be declared as such, right? So, but the context the animals are put in, it's an obesogenic environment for livestock.
Derek, I have a quick question, and I'll let you jump in, but this is fresh in my mind right now. If the cattle or the animal is consuming a high level of antibiotics, that means, I mean, that's somewhat bioavailable once it goes through the slaughtering process and once the meat is packed and once it's cooked. As human beings, aren't we consuming those antibiotics as well?
That's a great question. And there's been good research in this, and there's no data that antibiotics will be actually contained in the
process or whatever it's called. Yeah.
So they won't be actually in the musculature of the animal. The issues with the antibiotics is, and that's just because, you know, we're amazingly well, you know, designed and evolved, right? In general, like heavy metals can get into bones and things like that. I mean, in general, animals are really, you know, really good with our body blood barrier. You know, we keep things clean. But, you know, broadly, the issues, so the issues that you'd want to be concerned about just from an ethical perspective with the antibiotics is that communities that live within miles of these farms have significant antibiotic resistance issues. And there's also lots of good data that shows that people who live near CAFOs have issues with fertility, have low birth weight, and have a very high incidence of miscarriage in stillborn infants. Wow. So there's antibiotics in the water and in the air. They've shown that tetracycline in the air, like within 5 miles of plants. So it's going to that's where it's kind of, I mean, it's really sad from a social justice perspective. You know, a lot of these farms are, they're staffed. I mean, the people that work there are among the most like disenfranchised and impoverished. And also typically many like new immigrant communities. In the chicken industry, it's mostly Southeast Asian. And then I know that in the pork industry, the farms are actually clustered near like historically Black communities in the Southeast. So there's some definite like social issues. And I think if you look now at like the COVID spread, I'm tracking it pretty closely here in California, and the big boom areas, it's all in these really afflicted agriculture communities where you have 3 to 5 times the rate of asthma already because of the use of agricultural chemicals, right? So, I mean, in general, these are like kind of the negative impacts are disproportionately showing up in the communities that serve and live near these farms. That's like in terms of the actual antibiotic impact. But from a health perspective, there's definitely evidence that the quality of the protein for these animals that grow on this vastly like exaggerated time frame, there's things that happen, like there's something called woody breast. You can Google it in chicken, where somebody will eat chicken and be like, there's actually a splinter of wood in this chicken, but it's just a hyper fast growing protein strand that it almost like petrifies. So the suggestion is that if there's extreme cases like that, there's definitely lower manifestations as well, right? So these fast growing proteins, what I have observed in many taste tests is that you'll get a lot of granularity and low solubility. So when you eat these very, very fast growing chicken and beef, you'll actually kind of, you ever had that experience, especially with chicken, where it's almost like it's like sawdusty on your tongue afterwards?
Oh,
right?
That's gross.
And that's crummy, fast growing chicken.
Yeah.
So I hope that when I say that, you'll never eat that crap again.
No. You know what? It's funny. Sorry, Derek, I'm cutting you off right now, but I remember when it happened. It happened back in 1999. I remember that might've been the last time I actually experienced that. Yeah. And I was at Equinox on 74th in Amsterdam. And I went in and I ordered, they had a little cafeteria, and I ordered a chicken breast. And I remember the chicken breast came out, it was like this thick. And I remember looking at it just going, this doesn't look like, I've never seen a chicken breast like this. And as I was eating it, I almost got that aftertaste, and I almost tasted in a way, it sounded, you were going to say, well, that's ridiculous. It almost tasted a bit like chemicals.
Yeah.
It was disgusting. And I remember to this day, I still eat chicken, but it's the one food I can't, it's like red meat. I'm always making sure it's from a good source. But if you were to ask me, what am I a little bit lenient on if I'm ever traveling, listen, that for some reason it's red meat chicken. It put a bad taste in my mouth, and it really grossed me out. I'm like a little more afraid of chicken for some reason.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you should be. Yeah, chicken is the worst. And you know, that chemical taste you're tasting, that's not actually from the fast growing protein. That's from the bleach and lactic acid bath that's used after. That's the same reason if you had the experience when you cook crummy chicken and like this sploogy white liquid comes out.
Ew.
You seen that? Right? Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like, I'm looking at you, Derek, because I know that Don hasn't like touched a dirty chicken for decades. But if you
like, other things.
Thrown
that's the first.
I'm gonna leave that one.
That's the first chicken PTSD story I've ever heard.
Oh, so like if you throw a conventional chicken breast in the pan, as it sears, there's going to be this little white liquid that comes off. That's almost like an egg white look to it, and that's the. So the other gross thing about chicken, more than half of chicken sold in grocery stores in America is contaminated with fecal matter. And this is very well documented. And there's actually been a lawsuit from the Physicians of America against the chicken industry about this problem. And the reason why is that chickens are small and their digestive tract, it's all right there. So when they're slaughtered, it's a lot harder to keep them clean. When we kill a beef in our slaughterhouse, you actually, you know, the animal is killed with a captive bolt, certified humane. So it's actually basically like a 3 or 4 inch bolt goes into its brain, and it dies immediately. Then it's hung up, and all of the viscera, so the entire intestinal tract, is removed immediately, and it's intact because the viscera of the beef are quite thick, right? These are big stomachs, and the thickness of the intestine, it's a good 2 millimeters, right? So there's really no, I mean, to be really direct, there's no manure or fecal matter coming in contact with anything, because all the viscera is on the floor within minutes of the animal being killed. Mm-hmm. And then the skin comes off, and all the blood is gone at that point. And then basically you have the carcass of the animal.
Chicken tonight, Derek?
No shit. Yeah.
And then chicken has these tiny membranes. The membranes are, tiny. They're very fragile. They're covered in feathers, and you can't fully and easily remove the viscera in the same way, because they have to take all the feathers off first, right, before you cut it open. As you're doing that, there's a lot of stuff coming out, right? And then it's not gutted and removed until after it's been feathered, and then the head, it's like the whole process, it's tiny, it's got small viscera, and it has feathers, right? And this is a lot of detail, but basically you have a much higher contamination risk. So how we mandate that with beef in America, we spray it down with the mild lactic acid solution on the exterior of the carcass, right, to kind of manage this. But in the case of chicken, we actually dunk it, not Belcampo, but the industry, the American poultry industry. The convention is to take the whole chicken and dunk it into a low bleach solution. Okay, so we dunk it into water with a little bit of bleach in it and lactic acid. And we do that when the animal is still warm in America. And the reason we do it when it's warm is because that's, the highest contamination risk. But the neat thing about that for the chicken producer is that when an animal has just gone through a physical trauma, right? Think about it in your body, like when you get a bonk to the head, and then all of a sudden what happens? You get a bump.
Dizziness, warmness, I mean, some heat, concussion. What level are we talking out here?
You get a bump, right? You get a bump.
Of course. No,
so whenever you get a pretty significant trauma, your that muscle will absorb liquid in an attempt to heal. In the case of an animal that's just been decapitated and eviscerated, those muscles still do that function. So as soon as they are, put into this water, their musculature starts to absorb it rapidly. So the chicken carcass pre-soaking, so it goes in there warm, it will gain 15% in weight. And guess what? Chickens are sold by the pound.
Wow.
So you just made 15% more on that chicken.
Right.
So the sad thing about for my style of production, we don't use a water bath, and that's one thing as a consumer. Always look for air chilled, because that means you're not paying for the 20% that's just bleachy water.
Yeah, which is
right?
crap. Right.
Air chilled is a slower process. It takes longer, and you have to be more careful in the kill because you're not going to be able to dump it into bleach. And the crazy thing is, despite the bleach bath, after that, half of the chickens in America have poop on them.
Derek's gonna get sick. Look at him.
Right. I know. I feel like he's like reclining in his chair.
Derek's disappeared.
I'm looking for the eject button here.
Oh my God. You might just become vegan listening to me.
Well, that's my next question is, okay, I understand what you guys do versus what everyone else does. And that makes me go, well, will that push people to these meat substitutes? Like, oh, I'm going to be better off because I ate a patty made out of beans or whatever. Is that happening to some degree where people just get freaked out by any thought of meat and they go, well, I'll just make the chemically altered bean patty or whatever?
I mean, I think people should be deeply afraid of conventional meat. I totally agree. I don't think that the reasons, I think, the Impossibles and Beyond Burgers of the world, like, they're freaking people out about the carbon impact, but they don't have a great story to tell about that either, when you actually do the carbon footprint. But I mean, the challenge for me is I'm obviously not a fan of a hyper processed meat substitute made with genetically modified ingredients from China that also has like a ton of estrogen. This all seems like bad news. I also just, as kind of not a high level conspiracy theorist, but somebody who's, I think, justifiably suspicious of the food system. It seems to me really convenient that once people finally woke up to how much garbage we were eating and all these highly processed carbohydrate convenience foods, that all of a sudden we designed like the new carbohydrate-based convenience food that was going to take over as the Kellogg's and General Mills saw their cereal sales and granola bar sales declining slowly. Then all of a sudden, like the great white hope is this, this highly processed bean-based and protein-based stuff. That's really suspect to me. It's like you have this massive agricultural infrastructure ready to produce this type of garbage, and you just have a different type of garbage coming out of it from where I'm sitting, right? But independent of that, I think that the meat fear is justified, and I think many people will explore being vegan as a result. Because the problem is that my product, we now ship it all over the US, buy it, right? And many other small operations like ours do this, and it's available at farmers markets and it's available broadly. But we there's a price differential, and some people are at the supermarket and they don't have a lot of choices, right? So it's a hard thing to know. I think, Don, I think you and I are probably the same. Like, given the choice, if I'm in the airport and I'm famished and I want to eat something, I'll simply, that's when I'll go to a vegan place, no problem, or have a vegan option, right? Like, I'm opting out of meat if I can't get my quality of meat. And I think many people are in that And so if I'd say if you're in an area where you can't get access to clean product, you may want to become vegan. I don't know if the bean burgers and all the hyper processed soy based garbage is gonna take the main role on the plate that people were thinking a couple of years ago, though, because I think there's a lot of concern about what's actually in it.
I think for one meal, it's fine. It's like, okay, go for it. I think to make it a lifestyle, and then that's, I'm not saying it's an argument I get into, because it's almost like there's several things I just do not talk about with people. I don't like to talk politics. I don't like to talk religion. And recently, I just don't like to talk with certain people that are just picking a fight. So if someone comes to me and they're like, I'm a vegan, what do you think? And I'm like, well, are you a vegan because for humane purposes, do you think animal protein is bad? Is it religious purposes? And if they say, well, eating meat's bad, and it's almost like a conversation I don't want to have, because it's like a Republican nowadays talking with a Democrat. Like, no one can just have that conversation. It's like you're a bad person. These are your beliefs, but listen, sorry, go ahead.
One response that I have, particularly because a lot of young women are vegans, and many of them have, I've gotten plenty of outreach because I too was a vegan, mostly because, like most young women, I like to be lean, and it's a great way to stay lean. And I think that's, underlying a lot of the enthusiasm around veganism is that it's associated with being really slender, right? So there's that kind of complication for women, but something that I say is just, eating meat is one of the best things you can do for your fertility. And I think looking now at how many women are freezing their eggs in their late 20s and 30s, because we all have friends now who are struggling to get pregnant. It's such a widespread issue. And, I'd call out kind of like two factors. So I tend to hit it with some straight up data, which is that there's evidence, there's actually three pieces of data. There's really good scientific evidence that women who eat meat until they're just, prepubescent, 10 or 12, and then quit eating meat and have children in their 30s, it's been documented that essential fatty acids that they got from meat in their childhood end up in their fetus, because that nutrition is so important for early childhood development and for your fetus that it is conserved by women's bodies. And women who are on a vegan diet since birth do not have those essential fatty acids in their children, right? So there's a pretty amazing factor. Another one is that maternal access to quality DHAs from meat is a better indicator of performance on standardized IQ tests than your country's economic index. So when you isolate for access to DHAs and high quality animal protein from fish or meat, in like say in Ethiopia or Sweden, the mother's access to those proteins is a better indicator of their child's performance on IQ tests than their country's economic status. So that's a huge one. I mean, there's a lot of through lines from your baby's brain in DHAs and meat-based quality amino acids, right? There's a lot of good evidence around that. The third one that just is kind of a crazy fact is that when you're pregnant, when any animals, mammals are pregnant, like your baby's bones are actually made out of a matrix of collagen that calcifies. So just like the more bioavailability of proteins, animal proteins in your diet, collagen included, these are good things to have in our bodies as women. So that's why I tend to have those kind of arguments where I don't get into it of like why you do it. I'm like, here's some fun facts that you might want to know as a female, because I think it's important right now that there's so much concern about fertility, to kind of just like point to some data that says, hey, there's a lot of good evidence that suggests you have smarter kids when you eat meat as a mom. Right.
Yeah, that just shows where we are in a society, because everyone is so much more body composition, focused. I actually, did you say earlier that you find vegans have an easier time staying leaner?
Well, that's the perception. I think young women, that's the perception.
Because I actually disagreed with that for a second. Yeah, I mean, I
have never been so puffy and inflamed as
I find that's a big challenge. But yeah, I mean, that's interesting data that you gave us. Yet it's not talked about as much. People are more concerned with, oh, well, is my protein high enough? And, my body composition, I want to get leaner, but it just shows how a lot of us, not everyone, but a lot of people out there prioritize sex appeal over, actual, let's say hormonal health.
Yeah. I mean, there's a hormonal and then just broader like fertility and ability to produce viable offspring, I think is what you should be focused on.
And that's obviously a big thing. I've got a question of different qualities of, I'm sorry, different sources of proteins.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously, you mentioned bison earlier, steak, chicken, getting into things like pork, getting into things like fish now, which I don't know. Do you guys distribute fish?
We do not. We produce
Okay.
7 species on our ranch.
Can
So
you
we
go through those?
Yeah, our biggest species is beef. It's about 55% of our total poundage. The second after that is pork. We also chicken, lamb, turkey, goose, and duck. And I've done goat and partridge and other things in the past, but we've never been able to get the market for it. So we've got basically, our business is we're creating what we call pinnacle, which is like every type of thing you could do, we do. So we are regenerative, carbon impact negative, so sequestering carbon, of course, organic certified, of course, certified humane in both the life of the animal and in the killing of the animal, processing and cutting. We're also, the climate positive piece is implicit in that carbon one. So the goal is really, we want to check every box: grass-fed and finished, natural diets, and GMO free, right? So we for each species, we craft effectively a checklist of between 5 and 7 of these attributes based on going for the absolute best we can. And we focus that as well around like looking at how is the animal, like basically looking at key moments in life, like sex, mating, reproduction, child rearing, diet, environment, kind of the important stuff. And we orient all of our practices around what's an appropriate evolutionary approach to that phase of life.
Can you talk a little bit about, because I see we have a few more minutes to go, but we discussed beef and we discussed chicken, which are probably two of the most ordered items off your menu. But can you talk about lamb and pork?
Yeah, so lamb is very interesting to me right now because the lamb, in the U.S. we have a lot of feedlot lamb from New Zealand, and one thing I want to call out is you'll notice that those are like little teeny tiny chops, right? The tiny chops, and those are because lamb responds really strong to stress. Lamb and sheep, it's the oldest domesticated animal in human history. It's the first thing we ever domesticated. And because we domesticated back when people were kind of wild, it's effectively not very domesticated. It still responds hormonally or in its endocrine system, or it behaves like a wild animal. And like a wild animal, when it's shot at or chased or stressed, it darkens and gets a very strong cortisol response, okay? So if you've eaten elk or venison, you know that there can have this dark meat flavor, right? This very musky flavor that comes from a traumatic kill or traumatic aspects at the end of life. Lamb behaves in the same way. Feedlots are very stressful. Feedlots are very, very stressful, and they're very stressful for lamb's bodies, and lamb reacts in that way with that cortisol response. And so to mitigate that, what we've done is just kill the animals younger and younger, so that they don't have time to accumulate that musky flavor. So the way we raise lamb to be mild is we basically raise it in a very, very low stress way. And so I just encourage you to try, if you're sort of like, I like lamb, but it's too musky, and going for those tiny baby chops, I encourage to find a farm that's doing very low stress handling, because you'll find that much less of that kind of strong cortisol, lanolin flavor, right? But the lamb is effectively, same as the beef. It's a ruminant. It's a multi-stomach animal with the capacity to process this very low quality forage into high quality protein. So you want to look for grass-fed and finished. And then I'm always looking for, a lamb with a little bit more age on it, like 6 to 9 months, as opposed to the baby lamb, simply because it's just a little bit more gratifying to eat. You get more meat and a bit more flavor. So our product is all in that age range. And then our pork is certified humane and pastured, as well as organic. We have some of our animals that transition. So, we often are improving our programs or bringing new land in, and doing like new land have animals on land that's in transition. It loses its organic certification. So we have a number of these kind of hurdles. So you'll notice on our website that some of our products are non-organic, or they're labeled as transitional, and some are already organic certified. But our pork, we raise pastured. So it's actually truly free range and outdoors. Our pork, it's about the equivalent acres. It's something like, the typical space that we have for farrowing in life is like 40 square feet compared to, under 5 square feet for a conventional animal. We use no farrowing crates, so the animals mother naturally. In conventional ag, pigs are challenging because they're massive and they have lots of babies. And what happens is that they can, if in close quarters, roll over and kill their babies. So the way that we control that, conventional ag controls for that, is they'll actually encase the mother's body in a cage that prohibits it from moving, even from rolling over. It's a cage that wraps around its body and it allows its udders, its teats to stick out so that the babies can nurse on it. That's called a farrowing crate. You can Google it if you're feeling great and want to be in a bad mood and sad about the world.
Oh yeah, I'm not gonna do that.
So all of conventional ag is a farrowing crate. The other issue with pigs is that they will, when they're under stress, eat their babies, and that's also, you have stressed out mamas, and that the maternicide happens. So the key thing for us is to have happy, low key animals. And we do some things like to avoid just the rolling over issue, we put like a warm light in the pig's crate where it gives birth so that the babies can hang out someplace warm. It's not right adjacent to their mom where they're likely to get smushed. So some things like that are just kind of like simple, basic, old-fashioned farming tricks, to keep the babies warm and away from mom so she doesn't roll over. But we do not use farrowing crates. And our animals, as soon as those babies are at I think it's about 2.5 months, maybe it's less than that, they're out at pasture, they're playing. It's really cool to see. The pigs are running around, they're out, looking for roots, they're gathering stuff. They're pretty, pigs are also, they're carnivores as well, they're omnivores. And we've actually even had cases of pigs hunting and killing rattlesnakes on our farm. They're that, they're that wild, but they're not, that's not a regular part of their food.
God. Oh my God. Well, I'm going to let Derek take the last question. Derek, take it.
I'm just going to recover from all these stories here. But certainly
Thanks, great having you on.
One of the things, Anya, that I wanted to ask you, to kind of transition into a positive note here, is I noticed even with my family that we are spending more money on food now and trying to make better decisions because I'm not traveling. I think I've filled up my truck like twice in the last 6 months for gas. Like I'm not going anywhere with that.
Yeah.
So I have more disposable income. And I know a lot of people are having troubles during this time in terms of the economics and financial situation. But for people who do have the ability to shift money into better diets, is this something you're going to try to create awareness around and just obviously you're going to profit from it to some degree, but I think that's what people might be looking for right now is, okay, I have this time, I'm cooking more at home, I'm not going out to eat, I have more awareness around my diet, I want to spend the money, where do I spend it?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I am a passionate home cook, and I've been doing a lot on my Instagram around home cooking. And I just noticed how much more interest there is in that, which is so great for me because it's like, I feel like I've been saying the same thing for 15 years. Mm-hmm. I did a book about home cooking and I love to cook and I love all my recipes and approaches under 5 ingredients. And my whole mantra is we started out this conversation, Dawn, talking about olive oil. It's you can use only 5 ingredients for everything if you buy really high quality ingredients, And so that's been a message that I've been on for years. And I do think that's a really great point. People do have some more disposable income. I've noticed that myself. I'm like, wow, my bank balance is increasing, right? And it's just really nice to see for those of us who are privileged enough to have the continuity of work. But I do think you gotta really look as well as your kitchen and your ability to control what you eat is the first step in owning your health, right? And I don't think that that's been in the US, we really happily outsourced all of our food production to some pretty big multinationals 30, 40 years ago. This transition started where we're like, this is so great. And I think it's also complicated for women because you're this is so liberating to be free of the kitchen and free of this drudgery. As somebody who loves domesticity and also sees it as a way it's the biggest tool I have for my health and for my family's health is how I keep my home, how I feed my kids, how I'm, grow my veggies and find my veggies and what I do in that kitchen. That's 60% of my wellness is right there. Right. So I hope that this kind of like this homespun, in the same way that people are starting to understand, like, oh, you can grab a medicine ball and a couple kettlebells and get a pretty damn good workout in your living room if you've got the willpower and the mindset, right? So I think we're all starting to see it's like, maybe I don't need to, be buying a million different powders and making a bunch of, having a bunch of prefabricated like health foods or meal kits. Like, this is, if you're diligent about it and can put the time into it, it's actually within reach.
Well, listen, I mean, I started following you on IG recently. So anyone wants to follow her, I think it's Anya Fernald, right? ANYAFERNALD. The IG is fun because it's really more food inspired. I mean, you've got some delicious looking dishes on there. I know it's definitely giving me some ideas and some concepts that we're going to have some fun with. I'm definitely sure it won't taste as good as how you make it, but it's going to.
But it will, because I'm going to send you guys meat.
Oh, that was my next question. That was my next question. I actually want to put an order in. I want to try the home delivery because ironically and selfishly, I've been wanting to find a new. I used to order from a company called US Wellness Meats a while ago, and I kind of ventured off of that, and I started going to my local market. But I definitely, Ben was speaking so highly about it that we'd love to try.
No, I'm going to hook you guys both up right away
love that.
with a big credit at Belcampo.com. I want you to shop it and try some of my recipes and all that stuff, because it's really transformative, I think. And I also think for guys like you that you're tuned into your health, you'll notice the difference in your vitality and energy.
I would love that. Maybe we'll do like a little live cooking thing on my social media, and that could be fun. Yeah, definitely, Derek. Start following.
Belcampo event.
You're late to that one.
I'm sorry.
Could you let everyone know, Anya, where can they find you? Obviously, I mentioned the Instagram, but go through the Instagram again, and if they want to learn more about your company.
Absolutely. We're at Belcampo.com is all of our e-commerce. And then on Instagram is at Belcampo Meat Co. I personally am at Anya Fernald, and I've got a lot of great recipe content. And then our Belcampo account is about our farm, our ranching, our philosophy, and all that good stuff.
Well, like I said, I've been clocking you on the social. You've been doing a great job with that. I know for everyone who's following us, me and Derek, we highly, highly recommend Belcampo and Anya's page. Check that out. Food quality is probably one of the most important things that I talk about. There's so much benefit to it. We can go on for hours over it, and it's something that I think it's very underlooked in our society. We're always kind of leaning more towards the taboo diets, and I think people would find that their body would feel better, inflammation would become reduced, rest and recovery, energy levels, digestion starts improving just by changing the quality of the food that you're consuming, and that we really need to pay less attention to the nutritional content, or our little nutritional guide of how many protein, carbs, and fats that are in things, and more into the quality of foods that we're putting into our body. And like you said something earlier that I admire greatly. You mentioned about how when you normally cook, there's probably no more than 5 ingredients. And I'm like, pronounce our ingredients, and then you should know how many ingredients are going into a dish that you're cooking. So good for you, and congratulations on everything. And thanks for making a difference.
Thank you for having me. I can't wait to hook you up with some meat.
I can't wait to try and post about it, because I'm going to get a lot of people turned on to this, because I already know I'm going to love it.
I'm going to email you right away, get your addresses. I'll curate the first box.
Anya, thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Much.
Thank you.
Looking forward to keeping in touch, all right?
Cool. Bye.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks, Dave.